Okay. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Welcome. Welcome to those who are joining us virtually and everyone who was able to make it here in person to the Bill Library up in Ledyard Center. My name is Matt Novosad. I'm the assistant librarian here. I'd like to welcome both Betsy Graham and Dan Mullins this evening, who will be giving this wonderful presentation for us tonight. So thank you.
You're taking it?
Yes, yep, that's correct.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
So am I supposed to be on here? My head?
Just the camera.
Which one? Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. Welcome everybody to our talk this evening. I'm Betsy Graham. I'm a resident of Long Pond and also the secretary of the Ledyard Hill Valley Association. On behalf of the Ledyard Hill Valley Association, I'd like to thank you very much for attending. I'd also like to thank our speaker, Dan Mullins, who's the executive director of the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, which is located in Norwich. And he will be talking this evening on lakes and landscapes, the importance of their importance in our watersheds. Also, thank you, Matt and the library, for letting us host this here. We appreciate that, and also offering Zoom as an option for those who wanted to attend and couldn't attend in person. A little bit about me. I have been a longtime resident of Ledyard, living over on Long Pond and belonging to the Ledyard Hill Valley Association for about 40 years now. If you're not familiar with Long Pond is on the eastern edge of Ledyard, and it borders with the town of North Stonington. It's in the Lantern Hill Valley, and the Lantern Hill Valley is part of the Whitford Brook Watershed, which actually knows no borders. It starts up in North Stonington, it runs down through North Stonington and Ledyard and Stonington and Groton, and ends up at the Mystic River. The Lantern Hill Valley is actually a glacial valley, which was formed 10,000 years ago when the glaciers retreated. And in doing so, they formed the pure silica deposit that we know of as Lantern Hill, which stands close to 500 feet. That was thought to be named Lantern Hill because in the colonial days, it would have been totally cleared off as everything else was cleared off for farming. And from the Long Island Sound, it would have been a beacon of light that would have been easy for sailors to mark where they were along the coastline. In the process of the glaciers retreating, they also formed 3 kettle ponds. One is today Lantern Hill Pond at the base of Lantern Hill. There are 2 in Long Pond, a very deep one, close to 70 feet deep at the north end, and then a more shallow one about 25 feet toward the south end. They were all connected by an ancient stream bed, which still is present supposedly on the bottom of Long Pond. And on old maps from the mid 1700s, you actually see this listed as the Mystic River, spelled M-I-S-T-I-C-K, because in fact the water flowed down to what became the Mystic River. The name was gradually changed to Whitford Brook after a resident that lived in the area on the brook a little bit farther south. And so today, the waters of Lantern Hill, Long Pond, and Bush Pond become the headwaters of the Mystic River as they flow on south. That's about 4.5, 5 miles south of where we are situated in Lantern Hill Valley. Back during the post-glacial age, there's evidence of nomadic tribes, nomadic groups that moved around. Eventually they formed and organized into the Native American tribes that we started to recognize. We still have evidence, we still have them with us today, very much so. They're present as the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, just about 1.5 miles north of Long Pond. And on the eastern shore of Long Pond and the north shores of Bush Pond is the Eastern Pequot Tribal Reservation. In the 1600s, as the colonies started to develop, we had migrants from Europe come over and they occupied the shores, they moved inland. As they moved inland, they started to dam up streams and the rivers for water power related activities. We had sawmills in the area, we had grist mills. In fact, there's still remnants, not remnants, it's in full force, a dam on Long Pond, which is from the mid to late 1700s. That's the Bush Pond Stone-Face Dam, it's friendly called. And next to it is a cottage that's still used seasonally by the family that owns it. that was from the mill era in the late 1700s. So it's very present still today. Sorry, let me, where was I going? Oh, sorry, apologize. The dams have always been privately owned. They had the original dam owners. There isn't any obvious good record at the moment on how the Long Pond Dam developed. You can see on all maps that it actually was as the Bush Pond Dam developed, and then Long Pond started to get dammed up. The dam was actually moved south and Long Pond was extended. And it appears to be that the spillway that's present on it was probably the primary water outlet that was used for both entities, because they were using the water power controlled for the Bush Pond Dam for its mill. In the 1950s, the state of Connecticut decided it wanted to put a boat launch on Long Pond. And so it purchased some land at the north end and created a public boat launch that's been there for public recreation ever since. Having said that, the waters of the lakes are publicly owned. They're not owned by any one person, but the dams have remained in control of private ownership ever since they were originally put in, though the ownership has gradually changed over the years. In the 1960s, the local residents started to realize that the dams were not in as good health as they should be. There was concern that the state was going to actually dismantle them and drain the ponds over fear of the dams rupturing. And so they talked to the owner of the dams at the time and asked if there was something that the owner could do to repair them. The owner wasn't able to afford what was required for the state upgrades, but they worked out an agreement, and he said that if you form a formal organization and have the repairs done and the state is satisfied with everything, then I will turn over ownership of the dams to your organization. So in the mid 1970s, the Lantern Hill Valley Association was formed. It was able to get support from Ottawa Silica, which was the silica mine at the time that was mining away the long hill and trying to get to Lantern Hill to mine the silica deposits for that. And they also had an engineer who lived on the state who volunteered his services. The state approved the plans of reconstruction for the Long Pond Dam and the Bush Pond Dam. And they completed that. And in 1976, the Lantern Hill Valley Association was handed the deeds to the Long Pond Dam and the Bush Pond Dam. And they have been the owners ever since, which goes along with the responsibility of maintaining the dams and also making sure that they're staying at state standards for safety. The Lantern Hill Valley Association has always been a volunteer-based organization. They are a not-for-profit organization, but they are not a 501c3. And we've been fortunate to have a lot of public support, both of residents and non-residents, in helping us continue to do our mission of trying to preserve and protect the waters of Long Pond and Bush Pond, as well as the aesthetics of the Lantern Hill Valley area. Today, we are engaged with Save the Sound, which many people may be familiar with. And Save the Sound and the Connecticut State Fisheries Department approached us about installing a nature-like fishway through the dam of Long Pond. The reason for this was trying to restore habitat for herring, river herring in particular, which are an anadromous fish that need to have freshwater lakes for their spawning purposes. They also are a little unique in the fact that they can spawn and then they can return back to the ocean where their mature cycle is maturing in the ocean. And so once they're mature, they can swim up the rivers, they spawn in the lakes, and then they can go back to the ocean for a little bit longer, then they can come back up and spawn again, which is a very different contrast compared to salmon. They also like fast-moving streams. They're not leapers like salmon are. So a nature-like fishway, I think of it as a brook that's running downstream in Vermont or New Hampshire. When you're going up there looking at leaves and you see that babbling brook running by you, that's the type of structure that is going to be installed. and the Long Pond Dam. The other benefit to it is that the pools provide habitat for other fish and amphibians that are in the Whiffer Brook. In fact, we know that last year they were able to trap over 35 river herring that made it just within a mile of the Long Pond Dam, which was pretty exciting to know that they're getting pretty close. And I think, I do want to emphasize the importance of river herring in the ecology of especially the ocean, because they have been really threatened by the fishing practices that happen. And so river herring get caught up in the nets of trawlers and then are just dumped. They're not saved at all, but they end up dying. And so that's compromised food resources for critical ocean mammals, ocean birds, and fish. And so the restoration of this habitat will actually, it's projected to be a 200,000 river herring run each year annually when it matures, which is a lot of fish going up Whiffer Brook, and we're thrilled to see that happening. So with that, let me introduce our speaker, Dan Mullins. And his background is in environmental law from the University of Connecticut. Prior to joining the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District in 2014, he was also involved with the Willimantic River and their migratory fish restoration, as well as creating an urban whitewater facility for recreational boating, which I thought was an interesting topic. So please let me introduce Dan. As he's talking, things to think about might be, how do landscapes impact our water quality? And what's the impact of land use decisions on lake health, the aquatic life, and the recreational use of these lakes? And what can we do to improve the quality of our water resources? So thank you. And I'll turn I'm sorry, I meant to play a video. I apologize, I totally forgot. Just to give you the eagle eye view of Long Pond and Lantern Hill Valley and why the Whiffer Brook watershed is important. Sorry, thank you. There you go. Sound louder? All right. Well, let me turn, I need Matt again, turn this over to Dan, and thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for your attention.
This one based on how the approach John and design the only good for Olympic weather. We know the nominal concept. Which really what was interest. What it means on there.
Yeah, if you want to respond to certain.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So my discussion today is called Lakes and Landscapes. And the reason I call it that is because this is a lakes program, but libraries love lakes, and landscapes at the landscape scale are very important to keeping a water body healthy, in this case, long pond, bush pond. So the questions that Betsy posed, how do landscapes impact water quality and lake health? And the impacts of land use decisions at the municipal and the watershed level. And they can have really negative consequences on a lake's health, and including impacts to, aquatic life, recreational opportunities. And if you happen to be in a drinking water watershed, it can have a huge impact on drinking water too. So what can you as individuals do? What can municipalities do? And what is the state and federal government doing to protect water quality? And I have to say, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it's a huge uphill climb. There's so much development going on, and the more impervious surfaces we create where the stormwater is not infiltrating into the ground and getting purified from natural processes, it's running off the roads, our roofs, our cars, parking lots, sidewalks, into the storm drains, and for the most part, discharging into local water bodies and ponds, lakes, and into Long Island Sound. Somebody said something. So I'm kind of forward the slide here. It's this one, right? Okay, yeah, I hit that. Okay, so Betsy gave a great overview of the Long Pond and the watershed. She did mention that the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation is on the eastern shores, and we've actually been in contact with the tribe recently. They're doing some agriculture up there, and they're looking for some assistance. So we've been trying to find out some funding for that. It's a beautiful watershed, and the video you guys create is amazing. It's a great, resource for educating people and promoting your project. And I also have to say that, we have watershed organizations throughout Eastern Connecticut that we've developed, and we need watershed champions like Betsy and her organization to really carry the burden, because conservation district, we do the best we can, but we need funding to man these watershed committees, to run them and coordinate them. So you really need volunteers who can do that in the long term, because funding runs out eventually. So thank you for all your hard work. So as landscapes impact water bodies, you look at the land uses, and the wonderful thing is that the Long Pond watershed has 73% forest, and that is the best type of land in a watershed to protect water quality. Water infiltrates well in forested soils, purifies it, so it's great. You've got 7.6% developed land, which is also very good to see, because once you get up to 10 to 12% impervious surface in a water body, in a watershed, then virtually you will always see impacts to water quality. So if you have developed land that's less than 10 to 12%, that's a real positive for the watershed. Small amount of agricultural fields, of course, farming does contribute non-point source pollution. Dairy farms spread manure, they spread chemical fertilizers, and if farms don't have enough storage for their manure, then they have to spread at times every single day, regardless of weather conditions, because they don't have the storage capacity. So having some agricultural fields in the watershed, but not a lot, is very beneficial as well. And you've got 4.7% of the land mass covered with water, lakes, ponds, etc. And there is 2.5% turf and grass, which isn't the best type of land use to have. It doesn't really infiltrate water at the rate you would like it to. It's considered kind of semi-pervious because it probably drains or infiltrates about 40 to 60% of the water, and the rest of it's running off. The root masses of lawns are very dense and they don't allow for that infiltration. You've got forested wetland and coniferous forest and other grasses as well. So you've got a really good base to start with in protecting the water quality in one fund. So sources of what we call NPS or non-point source pollution, and I had another presentation that Matt almost pulled up. I did last week at the Three Rivers Community College, and I called it collectively unconscious, because many people are unaware of the impact of their daily activities and what they do to water quality. So kind of listed some sources of non-point source pollution. And for the most part, we're talking about sediment, pathogens, nutrients, and metals. Conservation district primarily deals with sediment, pathogens, and nutrients. If you're assisting dairy farmers with manure management, you're getting all three: sediment, pathogens, nutrients. So you're getting real benefit. So some of the non-point source pollution are the fertilizers and the pesticides that we use at home, in our gardens, on the lawns, and then commercial agricultural fertilizers and pesticides. You might drive around the countryside and see brown fields in the spring. We call producers farmers, are burning down their cover crops. They use basically Roundup to do that. And again, I mentioned manure that is used as fertilizers, and if farms don't have proper storage and manure management capacity, they're spreading their manure more frequently than they need to. They might be spreading it before rain or on frozen ground, and that facilitates the runoff into the local water bodies and on around the South Mystic River. And pet waste. People don't understand the amount of pet waste that is out in the landscape. So I do encourage you to, bring the baggies along with you and pick up your dog waste and dispose of it properly. And I have a dog, and it takes some time to really get into the habit sometimes. So it's on all of us to take those little actions to protect the water. And again, poorly functioning septic systems, they can be quite an expense for folks who can't afford it. So if you have a poorly functioning septic system, you're getting leaching into the water, local water bodies. And of course, car fluids, keeping your car maintained. Again, that's an expense, and people don't have the money to stop an oil leak. They might have the gasket that's blown or something, and they just keep. So it can be expensive, but we need to maintain our cars. And salt and sand on roadways also create non-point source pollution. So we're currently engaged, the Conservation District and the Salt Watch Program, where we're monitoring salt levels in water bodies in the winter, but Connecticut Deep has requested we do that in the summer as well, so we can get an idea of how these salts are getting into the groundwater, because if they're in the waterway in the summertime, then it's coming through the groundwater. If you guys have any questions at any time, raise your hand. informal, so I have no problem with you asking a question while I'm speaking. So some of the impacts from non-point source pollution, you're fully aware of, I'm sure. You've probably been to beaches where they've been closed because of impacts from pathogens, and usually that's right after a rainfall. You get a lot of pathogens running into a water, and it takes a couple of days for that to clean out. So they will close down beaches along Long Island Sound after rainfalls. Fishing and shellfishing. A lot of our we have a couple of coastal watershed committees, and our objective is to improve the water quality in Niantic River Bay, which Niantic River estuary rather, which traditionally had a lot of Niantic Bay scallops which were really nationally known and renowned. There's still some left, but nitrogen and sediments that run off the landscape impact the eelgrass beds. And what that does is that's habitat for our shellfish. So it's impacting the shellfishing. Aquatic life support, again, fish, other types of aquatic life support are impacted by non-point source pollution. And as I mentioned previously, source water for drinking. We do a lot of work in Northeast Connecticut. In the Little River watershed, there's a lot of agriculture up there. That's the primary source of non-point source pollution in the watershed, the Little River, which provides drinking water to the town of Putnam. So tens and tens of millions of dollars have been spent on agricultural projects in the Little River watershed to help improve the water quality. So solutions to water pollution, the Water Act in 1948, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act was enacted. Didn't have a lot of teeth, but it was a good start. And the real changes came in 1972 when the Clean Water Act was implemented, and the first objective of the Clean Water Act 1972 was to control point source pollution, which I don't think there's a lot of it in the Long Pond watershed. I didn't look into that, but that would be like factories that are discharging directly to a waterway. And so the Clean Water Act, as I said, made it illegal to discharge a pollutant from a point source. A factory is what we traditionally think about as a point source, but also the cutting edge of what we are considering point sources is agricultural lands where they have ditches. And that's been a hot topic of debate and back and forth in Congress about, do they regulate farm ditches? And there's two opposing sides. Basically, it was the Commerce Clause that gave federal government jurisdiction over navigable waters of the United States. So the big argument and debate has been over what we consider navigable waters, and do waters that are not navigable, can they be protected under federal law, the Clean Water Act, because they're connected to navigable waters, because impacts from local farm ditches do impact the navigable waters of the United States. So the EPA developed a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. We call it NPDES, which is a permitting provision under the Clean Water Act, where factories that discharge point sources into waterways have to get a permit. So they created what we call the TMDLs, the total maximum daily load, and water quality standards. So you can think of a total maximum daily load as a pollution budget. So they want to protect. EPA's goal under the Clean Water Act is to protect existing uses. So Connecticut administers funding through the Clean Water Act for the state of Connecticut, and they go out and monitor water bodies, rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, and they classify them for their uses, whether it's for drinking water, which is a high use, aquatic life support, fishing, swimming, those are all high uses. And then another permittable use is allowing factories to use the water and discharge into it, which are in contrast to other uses. But so they create the budget, the MDL, the water pollution budget, and they allocate how much pollution can be discharged into a river under the TMDL, the total maximum daily load. So they also created water quality standards, and there's 3 core components of water quality standards, which are the designated uses, which I just described, the aquatic life support, fishing, swimming, drinking water, and use by factories and industry. And then they developed the criteria, the TMDL, to protect the designated uses, and then they have anti-degradation requirements. So it's kind of a retroactive approach to addressing water pollution. And one would think that you'd want to actually improve water quality rather than just protect the existing uses. And I think we are getting there. And Eastern Connecticut Conservation District created a watershed plan for the Upper Natural River, which was the first one in the state of Connecticut to protect a healthy water body rather than addressing existing pollution that's in the water body. So that's a proactive approach. So again, these are the designated uses. I'm not going to use them again, but that's what EPA seeks to protect under the Clean Water Act. So the TMDL is a numeric classification of the TMDL, but you can also have a narrative which say we want to protect a water body from too much stink or keeping it free from certain negative conditions such as toxic pollutants. TMDLs are numeric and probably have more teeth to them because obviously when you're creating a narrative about water quality is very subjective. So currently, the Clean Water Act and the district gets quite a bit of funding through the state of Connecticut through the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act, which is for non-point source pollution. And under the Clean Water Act, EPA and Connecticut DEP require a 9-element watershed plan in order to get funding through the Clean Water Act. So we develop 9-element watershed plans. We submit them to Connecticut DEP and EPA. They get approved, and then we use that as the guideline to protect the water body, improve water quality. It provides guidance and recommendations to do that. So these are just a handful of the watershed plans that we've developed in Eastern Connecticut Conservation District. And so other solutions to water quality protection and local actions that can be taken. So all towns are required to have plans of conservation and development, including Ledyard. If I accidentally say North Stonington, I've got North Stonington in my brain too. But by creating land use regulations, their plans of conservation development, they have control over zoning regulations and then individual actions. What can people like ourselves do at our homes or our businesses to protect water quality? So plans of conservation and development are required by Connecticut General Statutes. So every town develops a plan of conservation and development. They have to revise it every 10 years. So the Ledyard's current plan went in effect in February 2020. So it's not that old yet. So I see plans of conservation and development. They have some of the same challenges that the conservation district does, towns and states and nationally. The issue of balancing land uses within a watershed to protect water quality while allowing development, which, you know, unfortunately is needed, but development can be done right, and towns have to have ordinances that support certain types of development. So this is actually from Ledyard's land use regulations, you know, plan of conservation and development. So they do have goals to manage development. So keeping it being careful to protect the character of Ledyard and again, providing flexibility needed to attract new residents and new business. So that's, again, balance that's always going on. Maintain regulations for suitable subdivision and zoning regulations. And that's, again, where people at the local level can get involved in their local community and their government to make sure that they're implementing land use regulation ordinances that are protecting water quality. And again, you know, support the development of the plan of conservation and development. That's where, you know, you get revised zoning in the wetlands subdivision regulations, be involved and speak up. So Ledyard's plan of conservation and development regarding land use regulations. And again, I'm gonna have to kind of read these because I didn't have enough time to really take them into my brain. But So these are some positive zoning regulations: accessory dwelling units, changing definitions of families, and the need for alternative and affordable housing will require regulation within the town. And to evolve those subdivision regulations, they were last updated in 2012, and they need to be updated to improve the alignment with their zoning regs to ensure consistency. So again, that's where you guys can get involved. And act for watershed protection. This is where it's really critical for Long Pond and other water bodies in Ledyard get involved to implement effective aquifer and watershed protection regulations. They also have an open space goal, which is good for Ledyard and Long Pond. Like I said, there's a lot of forest in the watershed. So the goal is to preserve open space and to acquire and protect high value open space. You find this in a lot of plans of conservation development, but it's very important. And developing networks between open spaces. You know, a lot of habitat is fragmented, but also providing townwide trails and access to these open space is really important for people to develop and nurture watersheds and the national environment. So, you know, this is probably the most important one in terms of water quality, is protecting the water resources, the wetlands, water courses, and vernal pools. I had a discussion earlier here from pollution to minimize the impact from impervious surfaces, which I mentioned. If you get to 10 to 12% of a watershed having impervious, 10 to 12% of impervious surface, invariably the water quality is impaired. So controlling development. And what's going on in London, they have a stormwater utility. I don't know if you're aware of that or paid attention to that, but it's the first one in the state of Connecticut. And basically, residents and businesses are charged to pay for the impervious surface they have on their property. People look at it like a tax, but it's more like a use fee. It's been very successful in New London because they are able to get money to do stormwater improvements and to further protect water quality, requiring property owners to infiltrate stormwater on site rather than running off. There's a big push in Connecticut now for more stormwater utilities. So if it comes up in your town, support it. But just a little bit more money, but what's more important to us than our water and our air? So again, the implementation part of the open space plan for under the conservation plan of conservation development is create an inventory, pursue designation to raise the profile of open space through the participation in regional and state programs, and encourage education. And I think education is really the most important thing we can do, because like my last presentation, I entitled it Collectively Unconscious, because a lot of people are not even aware of how our daily activities are impacting the water quality in the brook next to their home. So protecting water quality can be furthered again by following strategies such as protecting wetlands and water courses from pollution and erratic flow levels. And with climate change, and we get these torrential rain downpours now, we're getting inches of rain within hours, creates a lot of erosion and a lot of runoff from impervious surfaces. The other impact too from impervious surfaces, especially in the summertime, it heats up the water before it goes into water. So you might have a cold water stream that's getting super heated by the water flowing onto an impervious surface and then into a water. And you know, brook trout, they need cold water. So it has a large impact on aquatic life. And this is implementing low impact development practice. So low impact development, that's reducing your footprint for impervious surfaces, using practices such as rain gardens, bioswales, other types of infrastructure that will infiltrate stormwater on the ground. And again, that's where local residents can get involved in local government and insist that these practices are followed. And creating aquifer protection zones. I was involved in the project up the Yukon with that. But again, seeking to minimize the impact of impervious surfaces, which can themselves accelerate pollution and contaminants into the water. So again, here I said incorporate impervious surface fee ordinance. This is in the plan of conservation and development. I don't know whether it's been implemented. I don't think so in Ledger, but it's certainly in their plan of conservation and development. That was.
Kind of like we talk about, like developments going in like up the street and down the street. There's only so much. And then they all take up land space like we have. And then they're all dumping waste into the soil.
Okay, so, so in terms of agriculture, I mentioned how much, fertilizer, pesticides, Roundup, manure is used by large agricultural operations and small, and people use that stuff on their own gardens and lawns as well. But under the plan of conservation development, they Ledger wants to encourage agriculture, which is a good thing. We need food and fiber. Do it right though. Unfortunately, dairy farms are under a lot of financial stress. Milk prices are pretty good right now. It's about $22 a 100 pound. But back in 2014, 15, $12 a 100 pounds. So large dairy farms were losing $10,000, $20,000 a month. A lot of money. So they do need federal and state assistance to do what they want to do. They just don't have the financial resources to stay viable and create a feed stall barn that costs $1 million with waste management and storage tanks. It's very expensive and they want to do it, but they just don't have the money. So promoting agribusiness, but more importantly, encourage watershed protection by having farmers work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is really the primary agency under USDA, which supports farmers in implementing conservation practices that are going to protect water quality. So some of the things that farmers need to do and they're encouraged to do, it's a voluntary program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. It's a Natural Resource Conservation Service program, strictly voluntary, but they will pay dairy farmers to do lots of different conservation practices. An important one is cover crops. So many people might be aware of winter rye, which is very quick. It grows very fast and survives late into the winter or through the winter, depending on where you're located. But as soon as you get a cover crop in the ground, you got roots in the ground protected from erosion and discharge of erosion and any kind of pathogens that might be in that erosion. So cover crops. But there's also diverse mixes of cover crops. So some cover crops will actually fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it into the roots of the plants. Legumes, think of beans and that sort of thing, fix nitrogen. So then when farmers kill the cover crop, they already have nitrogen that's been extracted out of the atmosphere and it's in the soil, so they don't need to fertilize the soil.
Whatever you want, dear. Happy birthday.
Oh, this is.
Then this is your birthday.
So under the implementation section of the plan of conservation and development for agriculture, I noted that there's really no mention of implementing or encouraging watershed protection, which would really be an ideal place to have an allusion to implementing practices for watershed protection. Though it is mentioned in other places in the plan of conservation and development. So one of the agricultural goal states that, to encourage local farmers participating in education and grant programs, such as the one I mentioned, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Conservation Stewardship Grants, Environmental Quality Incentive Programs, and to ensure that agriculture uses are preserving and protecting the town's resources, and everybody has a vested interest in that. I work with a lot of farmers. I love farmers. They're so hardworking, and the young people who are growing up on farms are so talented. To see the things they can do when they're 10 or 12 years old out there running heavy equipment, and they're so knowledgeable and motivated. It's really encouraging. And we do presentations around Eastern Connecticut, and we were doing one up in the Little River watershed at Woodstock Academy. And as I mentioned, the primary land use that we need to deal with to have an impact on non-point source pollution is agriculture. So we're talking and we're discussing the needs to assist farmers, and a gentleman stands up and says, "You're always picking on farmers." No, we're not picking on farmers. It happens to be the land use. If we go down into the Niagara River, we do a presentation, we're talking about residential development and commercial enterprises who have a lot of impervious surface. So it depends on the watershed you're in and what is producing that non-point source pollution. Yes.
When you talk to primarily agricultural communities and finding
Well, yeah, there's a big interest out there, regenerative farming. The work that Craig Floyd has done over at Food and Farm, but soil health and regenerative farming are big pushes these days. Soil health is really important in protecting water quality as well. So, conservation development in terms of housing, implement continued trends to grow zones and locations where accessory dwelling units can be harmoniously implemented, promote rental housing and cluster development. This is the one that I'm really interested in because if you have cluster development, then a lot of time what happens is a town will authorize or permit a project with cluster development where they set aside some land for conservation purposes. So you have less of an impact and less impervious surface when you have cluster development. In terms of utilities, I highlighted this one. It's called out specifically in the plan of conservation development about protecting water sources. So subdivision zoning, public works standards should be reviewed to ensure that calculations are required to show 0% increase in runoff. So that's again infiltrating stormwater on sites to prevent it from running off. So creating man-made and natural drainage systems to minimize the impact from development. And really towns statewide, nationwide can be doing that. It's all about money. So again, protected water sources is implementation that's called out. And again, to ensure that there's 0% increase in runoff from development. So land use regulations, the goals are to support and manage the growth and development of Ledyard in order to maximize both the environmental and the functional quality of life. Again, get involved and stop. Minimizing the impact of new developments and natural resources, the huge things, impervious surfaces. And then revise zoning, inland wetlands and subdivision regulations as necessary to implement the goals and the strategies of the plan of conservation and development. And then zoning regulations also recommend watershed and aquifer protection, which are becoming increasingly important, again, because of all the developments going on. And it's also called out in the plan of conservation and development, adopting zoning regulations that require all lots to contain a minimal building square. Again, that's all about the impervious surface. And again, it mentions supporting, encouraging cluster development.
Wow.
So here we get down to the nitty-gritty with what individuals can do. And because non-point source pollution, it really originates across landscapes. When it rains out, you're getting atmospheric deposition of pollutants, but also it's that rain that is striking on impervious surfaces and directly discharging into the storm drains, which by and large discharge directly into local streams, brooks, then into rivers. Some towns have their storm drains connected to their sewer system, which on the face of it might seem good, but at times they get inundated with water and they flood the public treatment works, and you get massive discharges of the effluent into like the Thames River or wherever. So it's not a great solution. So towns are working to actually disconnect their storm systems from their public treatment works. So, you know, how many of you have cars? All of us have cars. Some of us have 2 or 3 cars. How many of us have lawns? How many of us own dogs and pets, right? How many of you have gardens? So, you know, all of us have impacts and actions that we can take to protect water quality. So simple solutions that homeowners can do. Some of them are less expensive. Some of them are more expensive. Installing rain gardens. How many do you know what rain gardens are?
What's that? Either one, doesn't matter.
So a rain garden is a garden that's built kind of below the ground. So you excavate an area in the ground. Usually we go for 6 to 12 inches deep, depending on how much space we have. And we direct stormwater from a roof gutter, or it could be direct flow off of a driveway, parking lot, sidewalk, to direct that stormwater into the rain garden. And so you go in, you excavate it, you do a soil test. First you do an infiltration test, a mini perk test, to make sure
Maybe
you
I'll circle it.
infiltrate the water quickly enough. And then you plant plants in there. The plants take up the nutrients, the water infiltrates into the ground. Purified through natural sources, natural.
Anything that leaks out.
Rain gardens can be relatively inexpensive. If you can do it yourself, you have the ability to. I do a lot of hand excavation of rain gardens myself if they're small enough. It's pretty hard work, but it keeps me somewhat fit. Downspout planters, basically you. And you plant plants in it. You have stone in the bottom. It's lined. You connect it to your downspout from your gutter. The water will go into the downspout planter, get purified and discharged much cleaner. Rain barrels, we all know what rain barrels are, but they have a dual benefit. They protect water quality and you can conserve water with a rain barrel. And vegetative riparian buffers, that's a vegetative strip along the water body. And this is very relevant to Long Pond, you know, encouraging homeowners along the pond to have vegetation grow up along the water. Everybody likes the view to the lake. So if you can have a vegetative buffer, the wider, the better, the more benefits. The Natural Resource Conservation Service recommends at least a 30-foot buffer strip between agricultural practices and waterways, and the same would hold true for like residential properties. The wider the strip, the better you get other benefits: wildlife habitat, water quality protection, erosion protection from erosion. There's a lot of benefits to it. Pervious pavers, and I think I have some pictures. I get my presentations confused once in a while, but I think I have some pictures I can show you too. Pervious pavers are much more expensive. If you have the ability to install a driveway or a sidewalk with pervious pavers, then that's great. It allows the water to infiltrate rather than, again, so reducing your lawns and converting your lawn to pollinator habitat. Planting deep-rooted grasses. Lawns, like I said, are very shallow root systems and very compact. Different types of grass have deeper root systems, which allows the water to infiltrate more readily. Again, you know, eliminate the use of fertilizers. Everybody wants a perfect lawn.
Previous what?
Use
Pervious.
any pesticides or fertilizers. The lawn doesn't look great, but
So driveway, if
hurting
you.
the water quality either. Again, maintain your car to reduce and eliminate fluids discharging. Again, you could also do Talmy has created a book called Homegrown National Parks, and basically encouraging homeowners to transform their lawn into pollinator habitat and habitat for other types of wildlife. So again, here are some of the pictures I put in the slide, just to kind of demonstrate what rain gardens and downspout planters look like. The picture on the right is the rain garden we did above the Niantic River once we got done. And this woman had such a problem with runoff from the road in her driveway. It was flooding onto her property and then discharging into the neighbor's property. We installed this rain garden and she's just elated because it solved a couple of problems. It stopped the flooding into her neighbor's yard and also started infiltrating the rainwater on site. It's also a beautiful garden. I hand excavated that one myself with a little bit of help from the homeowner. And the left is a downspout planter conservation district installed at the Thompson Library. And as you can see, you've got the downspout planter. You've got some hardware that redirects the stormwater from the downspout planter and redirects it into the planter. And like I said, it's lined with a rubber mat filled about halfway with stone to allow storage capacity. But the upper half is soil and plants. The plants will take up the phosphorus and nutrients that might be present. You know, birds poop on roofs and contains pathogens and nutrients. So plants will uptake the nutrients and the pathogens will be treated in the soils underneath the plants. Again, rain barrels are an excellent solution to conserving water, especially we've had a lot of drought these last few years in Connecticut. It also protects the water quality by preventing roof water from running into streams. And here's some impervious or some pervious pavers on the right hand side. This is a stock photo that I took off the internet. We haven't done any pervious pavers at the Conservation District ever. We have our first project coming up and we're going to be installing some pervious pavers at Thompson Library. We're waiting for the contract, so we're kind of excited to be able to check off that as a BMP, a best management practice that we've implemented at the district. On the left is a riparian buffer that we installed last summer at the Eastbrook Mall. These are shrubs and small trees. What you don't see here, and when these grow and get larger, they'll have a better impact. But what you can't see here is we also planted a 10-foot strip of little blue stem. So that are deep-rooted grasses that will grow up. And that is between the parking lot and where you see these shrubs. So once you've got the little blue stem established, and that's going to provide really the water quality protection that we're looking for. In our personal responsibility, it is a sacrifice. So again, get involved with town government to influence the plan of conservation and development of local ordinances and requirements for zoning. Very important. A lot of people, and myself, I'm guilty too. I'm so busy I don't have time for government. But my dad was phenomenal. He was involved with town politics for years, for 20 years or more. It's really an important thing that we do. So again, taking action on your own property, some of the practices I just cited is really important. And it takes collective action, but for collective actions to have any impact, it takes individuals to do these things. So that's what I have. That's my email address, dan.mullins@comcast.net. And our website is www.conserveconnecticut.com/Eastern. And I want to thank the Lynch and Hill Valley Association and the Bill Library for inviting me here tonight. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. It's phenomenal. You're a watershed champion, and we need more of you. And the folks who support your efforts. So thank you. So we do have a question.
Yeah, it's a lot of information about newer homes on Homestead. One of them were seasonal, and then they were winterized and added on to. And these the cesspools exist just a few feet from the shoreline. They are always. It's $300. It's successful. I'm enjoying it. We usually pumping at the same time. I have 750-gallon septic tank. My system is in pretty good shape, but I actually did some repairs to the tank because when my outflow baffles had deteriorated, so I needed to put in a outflow baffle, which are not really huge undertakings, but I don't see them being done. Neighbor has their cesspool pump at the same time that I think activity. So the tanker truck, septic tank, and then they pump my neighbor's cesspool.
This sounds like.
See, because when they pump the cesspool, they only get 20 gallons. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
a scientist, any great measure, but it seems to me that if every year you have your cesspool pumped and they pump out 20 gallons, that means that most of their
Yeah.
their septic wastes are just going right into the lake.
Absolutely.
And I don't understand, I've been resident on the lake now for 40 years. And many meetings and it's been really ridiculous. They talk about the E. coli counts and then they want to have loudspeakers put up to discourage geese from landing on the lake because geese are the source of the problem. People, be real. The source of the problem is not the geese landing on the lake. The source of the problem is that these people don't pump their septics. They don't do anything. Know that
I can't quite get.
for 40 years. And you know when people are getting their septic tanks pumped or their cesspools addressed, and they're just not. So I found it interesting. The presentation is very informative. I think it's really a good presentation. But what we really need to do is is to examine our septic systems. It's not that mine just involved simple use of a metal rod with a mirror. That's how they found out that my outflow baffle had deteriorated, so that my septic is not working the way that it should be. Simple fix, like very expensive, which involved getting a certain piece and pipe is an outflow baffle. Other people, they can't do anything because they have limited land. I understand that you can't necessarily replace your cesspool with a modern functioning septic tank, but how can we get the message out there to these people that you don't wait until there's a problem, when your toilet backs up, that's when they decide maybe they should do some septic work. And it's like, don't wait until your toilet's backing up. And these people, these are my neighbors. I know them well. I know that I can tell you there are people that have never, ever pumped anything. Because you know what? It flushes and it just seems to disappear. So we don't worry about it. Well, it's disappearing going into this large body of water. And I think that is something that as homeowners, as the LHPA, I don't know how we can get some type of program going where people actually sign up. Like even if you can't afford to pump every year, how about like once in your lifetime?
Yeah, mind you, they're not saying just a little background information. The Conservation District got a grant from Connecticut Deep under the Section 319 grant program of the Clean Water Act for Massachusetts Brook Watershed, which is prepared for pathogens, E. coli and other pathogens. And the major component of that project was to encourage homeowners to replace or repair malfunctioning septic systems. We were going to provide a $5,000 incentive, and that was going to be matched with another $5,000. So we're talking $10,000 that we're going to provide the homeowners to encourage them to repair or replace their septic system. We did not have one take. And we went out there to neighborhoods, door-to-door solicitation, providing the information that, you know, we have this program, we can get you $10,000 if you're willing to participate. We sent the money back to Connecticut Deep unspent. So it's a difficult thing. Pardon me?
Why?
People might not, it's difficult to say. It could be, I mean, you know, septic could be $20,000, $30,000. So $10,000 is a pretty good chunk, but for a lot of people, that's even thrown in another 10 or 15 or $20,000 beyond their means. It was very eye-opening to say the least. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think that takes pressure from the community. You know, I don't know how else to approach that.
I think one of the first things you have to do is get people talking. So much difficulty. You know, when the people were talking about the goose experiment, and I stood up at the meeting and it mentioned the septic systems, the cesspools. And I asked for everybody, their system prompted the last 5 years to, and everybody just looked around at everybody else.
Get the word out, and that's one way. There you go.
You know, no one wants to spend money. Once every year, it's $200. And what I consider that my lawn is totally natural. Like my lawn is I go out and I cut whatever's growing. And it's that's my lawn and it doesn't.
Well, you should get the lake protection award. Yes, Joanne.
Fine.
Regular things, water quality. Not everybody's.
Ooh. District.
Yep, that's what we're concerned.
I was just thinking that we have to pay taxes. We have to.
I get water quality monitoring on different water bodies throughout the state. Some of it's done by the federal government, the USGS, state of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection does some water quality monitoring. Eastern Connecticut Conservation District is funded by the last Green Valley. We have a very robust volunteer water quality monitoring program. So we are probably the #1 organization in Eastern Connecticut that does the most water quality monitoring. But it is kind of expensive. It's very informative to have that data. Oh, it depends on how much monitoring you're doing and what you're monitoring for, you know, equal, I couldn't give you a thing for us.
Funny, he's still talking.
So the reason equal test support is a lot less expensive and it's considered an indicator of actually. So if you have E. coli present, then the chances are that you're gonna have other types of. And, you know, all warm-blooded animals have E. coli and. People. Not landscape animals, but you know, animals do, and certainly birds of animals. There's a large deer population in geese as well. They are an issue, and they're not a big issue. And the statistics says that all we have is 3 bucks geese. And from what I understand, I want to confirm this, but it's my understanding that geese don't actually defecate when you're in the water, but when they're on the shore, and that's where riparian buffers come in handy too, because geese don't like to get on the lawn if they, you know, Parent buffer acts like a natural fence, and they like to have a lot of space so they can see any better trees and everything by. So parent buffers and protect water quality. What's the key? These are a big problem. They really are. You know, we walk around Harkins Park and any little parks and ball fields. It's just nasty. I think it's it. But my solution is boost.
Municipality, gives a permit for getting from the development directly to the river. Is there then a regimen of testing that they will do to make sure that
That would be up to the local government to insist on.
so some do and some don't. They're not like a
I don't think
state
any,
requirement.
I would be very surprised. So 36,000. The only, a lot of water quality monitoring work testing goes on because the MS4 permit, which is MS4 municipal separate storm sewer system. So towns with MS4 permits are required to do water quality monitoring. So and a town itself may not be an MS4 town requiring an MS4 permit, but there could be a village center that is so highly densely populated that they require an MS4 permit for a section. Towns are required to do water quality if they're MS4. Now, currently in Connecticut, I can't say how many towns are MS4 towns, but it's anticipated over the next several years, maybe a little bit longer, that all towns will be MS4 towns. And that towns will be required to get an MS4 permit so they can discharge stormwater through the storm sewer system. Who would know that? You go on this, some of the towns should know, but there's the zoning official, planning official. You could also go on Connecticut Deep's website and look up MS4 towns. I think actually. Don't make computer. Yeah. Well, Groton is definitely funding. So most of the coastal communities are pretty densely developed. So a lot of it's for towns, which Romantic is not, which really surprised me.
How do you know about the actual
You finish your dinner.
Well, they do drill test wells where they take water samples out of aquifers. Also, if you're getting infiltration, obviously aquifers provide water to our wells. People do water well testing.
I know.
I think the primary needs would be to drill a test well into an aquifer.
But is that done?
It's not done regularly. I think that if there's an issue, if you have a brownfield nearby and you're getting complaints, then brownfield redevelopment, they want to test the groundwater for contaminants. But I mean, obviously they're underground, so you'd have to drill some kind of a test well and get the water out of it. Well, I think in the summertime when you've got drought conditions and you've got a full lake and you've got a pretty good groundwater supply. But with climate change and well, this is another way to help groundwater levels and aquifers infiltration of groundwater on the site rather than having rainwater on the site infiltrating into the ground and recharging our aquifers and groundwater rather than having it run into the brook, to 20%.
Farmer thing about today, was talking to Vernon, he was just make sure you stay away from brush. What is the kind of strong or not? Because we have no sunshine. All those ditches around. That one is, water, which is foreign.
And it's important to have snowpack because that melts over and infiltrates.
For land use regulation question. I understand that wetlands commissions sometimes are lost because all of the information they have about the affected by it is gathered by the soil scientists who paid by the state may have, regulation recommendation that towns could build into the application fee enough money that the town could hire its own users. If there's a need, do that. For example, you could end up in a situation like we did in Stonington. Wetlands Commission, we don't have. A lot of questions about this wetland regulation. So, we don't have access to it. So what would you suggest? And do you know of many towns who are actually building this in the application?
I'm not aware of. But know that you guys contacted us in the past. I mean, we do provide that kind of service, but it has to come, the request has to come from the municipalities that for us to review the plans. Yeah, and the other caveat is that we can only do that when we're funded. And we get a block grant from Connecticut that's called a block grant because all the conservation districts in the state get it. And we can use that block grant to do site plan reviews, make recommendations, but again, it's from the town, like the request. Currently, we don't have a block grant in place. We're waiting for a contract. Connecticut is understaffed. It's not. I work with Eric Thomas, he's the Watershed coordinator in Eastern Connecticut. Guy's super hard working. He dispels any myths about state work is not doing good work. This guy is just very good. He's got money. He'll try. He knows Eastern Connecticut, the watersheds industry. He knows Eastern Connecticut so well. It's from the guy's a hard worker. But Connecticut is understaffed, so we want people to get out there and be able to enforce regulations and to develop contracts. We've been getting contracts, unfortunately, 16 months before the deadline. So under the Clean Water Act, federal government allocates certain amount of money to the states. So for any given fiscal year, the state has 5 years to spend it. So for example, it's 2023 right now. They pick up funding under the Clean Water Act in 2008 for fiscal year 2018. That money has to be spent by the end of September 2023. And we are waiting on a contract for a project. The project I mentioned, the Thompson Library, I told Deep, like, we can't do it. We're on time now. It's time to go out and plan, hire a contractor, install perfect stairs at the library when we have 6 months to do it. We just can't do it. And we got a contract last year for part of the project was in the parent contract. I showed you the bushes on the and we got that contract 8 months before the deadline, and you had no time for contingency planning. If something goes wrong and property owner doesn't want to do what you want to do, you got to come up with other plans. And we got that project in, and Deep is very understanding under those circumstances, quite flexible. But Connecticut, they need more staff, and fortunately, in the next couple of years, we need mass goods and issues with a lot of people are retiring. Anyway, thank you all for coming in. Please do If you want a septic system maintenance guide. We have, you know, ways, your health and water quality. And rain gardens, how to install rain gardens, provide resources about getting more information on rain gardens. Landscaping for water quality. And we have how to create a stream side repairing buffer. So I encourage you all to take some of these. That is the one thing you can do to help you promote the health of long. Again, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all for coming tonight. It was very enjoyable. Thank you, Nancy and Betsy.
You're welcome.